I have actually a question for you to start. How do you get your news? Think about it. Last week, there was a strike again in Belgium. And I don't want you to think about the fact that there was again a strike in Belgium. I want you to think, how did that piece of information actually get to you? And was it valuable for you? Did you pay for it? Did you take it for granted? Who made it? And how did it make its way into your life? Was it maybe through your favorite news app? Was it maybe on social media? Was there a kind of a push notification? If so, who wrote that? Was it maybe on a radio or a podcast while you were commuting? Or maybe through a newsletter? Was there some sort of an algorithm behind it that personalized it for you? Would that even matter, actually, if that was the case for you? These are the kind of questions that the people working, like me, in the media technology world are asking themselves every day. And I'm happy to be able to have this conversation with all of you, because the media industry, the news media industry, is in very challenging times. 1,800 newspapers have closed their newsrooms since 2004 in the US alone. And this is actually data from 2018, so the number would even be higher. Actually, we see worldwide that about 100 newsrooms close every year. And this is not only happening in the US. I think we've seen that also just recently, right, a little less than 2 months ago. If you're traveling by train in Belgium, you might have loved to read the metro every now and then. They announced actually that they will close down. And if you can read Dutch, there's a sentence there from the editorial team behind it saying that we tried to do everything that we could. And only last week, I read this in the Brussels Times, there is the last kiosk, the last newspaper kiosk, which is in Brussels at Place Stéphanie, if you're familiar with Brussels, announced actually that they will close down as of the 1st of January. So this happens all over, and it is important to have this conversation because it is a transformational time in the world of news media and journalism. The business model for news media is actually changing, and it is actually a very exciting time to be part of this journey. But to understand why this is happening, we actually have to understand how the business model of news media is working. News media organizations rely on tens, hundreds of journalists, reporters, editors, people working in marketing or product, and so on and so forth, who work at crazy hours. Newspaper is usually produced at night. They have high availability. They travel to risky destinations on expensive insurances. Complex organizations. But the question is, who pays for all of that? Who pays for journalism? Do you pay for journalism? Traditionally, journalism has had two sources of revenue. One is something we call reader revenue. So this is the money that comes directly from people who read. So people who pay maybe a subscription, like you maybe do, or your parents, your grandparents. The other source of revenue for news media traditionally has been advertising. So if I am a car manufacturer, I would go in the past to the newspaper and I would buy a nice one full page ad in that newspaper for a period of a month, and then I would fund this way that news media organization who can in turn pay their journalists. Or if I am a restaurant or a hairdresser from Leuven, I would go to the local newspaper in my community and then buy a little bit of space in that newspaper, and I would gain an audience for my customers, and then they will make some money to fund their journalism. It was a perfect trio, and it worked very well. We know very well of news media organizations that have had and have managed to build very profitable businesses throughout the 80s and the 90s, also in the 2000s. So when media moved to digital, news media organizations continue to make a lot of money being able to replicate the same model. At the beginning of the internet, it was not much to do on the internet, right? So we could chat, which was fascinating. We could play some poor video games, which was also fascinating. But if you wanted to read content, who had content produced daily and fresh was the news media organizations. Now, I don't know if this is an actual image of the New York Times website in the early 2000s, but that's what the internet says. So we don't believe everything that's on the internet. But even if it's not, I think the image would not be too different from the reality. So there was a lot of advertising actually being also sold online. And I actually challenge you to look at some of your favorite news websites without an ad blocker. I'm sure you haven't tried that. You will see that the reality is not too different from that. So it's a model that worked very well. But then something changed. So what you see behind me is actually an overview of the revenue that news media organizations or newspapers would make. The line on top, the dark line on top, represents the money that comes from advertising. And you can see actually that the primary source of funding journalism and news media has traditionally been advertising. The line at the bottom represents the money that comes from reader revenue, so from people who actually are going to buy a subscription, or maybe they go to Place Stéphanie to buy a newspaper at the kiosk. Now, what you can see is that somewhere around 2007, something happened. What could have happened in 2007? In November 2007, Facebook launched their ads platform. And since then, there's been a continuous love and hatred battle between news media and social media. News media needs social media to be able to distribute some of the work that they're producing to people, like maybe some of you that have heard about that train strike on Instagram or on TikTok. On the other hand, social media has taken the largest part of that advertising revenue that the news media industry was so dependent on. Because if I am nowadays that same car manufacturer and I want to make an ad for my car, where am I going to go? I'm probably going to put my ad on YouTube. Or if I am that hairdresser in my neighborhood in Leuven and I want to promote my business, where am I going to go? I'm going to probably go on Instagram. So the news media model is changing. That's kind of the context in which news media organizations are operating right now. And it is challenging times. But I want to talk to you about the signals of good news, actually, that we're seeing through that change. Because no matter who you ask, and I've been in many conversations like these ones, everybody believes that news media and journalism are relevant for a well-functioning society. So people do see value in journalism. The question is, how can they make money? Seems like a simple question to answer for a lot of people who are bright in engineering and business modeling. Some believe that the state should play a role through subsidies. Not always the best idea. Others say that, and models like this apply, very rich individuals would buy a newspaper or a news media organization and fund it. It can also turn ugly. Some talk about the power of individual journalism. So people who are becoming bloggers or vloggers, or they build a newsletter of their own, and such they create their own journalism platform. Could that be an option? Maybe. Is it financially sustainable on the long term? To be seen. A lot of organizations are also dreaming of building large advertising consortia that can actually compete with the Facebooks and the Instagrams of this world. Because indeed, journalism institutions have been quite late at the game of realizing that suddenly, from journalism institutions, they are in competition with the largest tech companies of this world. Whatever the model will be, it is clear that there's changes that are happening in industry. Because many of the news media organizations have actually focused recently much more on that low line that you've seen in the previous chart. They focused on trying to convince reader that there is value in paying for the journalism that they produce. So that's why when you go to your favorite news website, sometimes you see these annoying pop-ups that ask you to pay if we want to reach the second or third article, and you're trying to circumvent that by going through all kind of different sites where you don't have to see that, and so on and so forth. So the model is changing. And it seems to be working, maybe not for some of you, but for many people it seems to be working, because what you see behind me is the proportion of people who actually paid for online news. You can see that split across different types of payments, donations, and so on and so forth. But essentially, I want to attract your attention to two things. One, you see it's on the rise. So more and more people are realizing that there is some value in actually paying for news online. Secondly, I want to attract your attention to the fact that we've seen a higher increase actually during COVID times. Interesting. During COVID times, people were seeking the truth. People felt the need to have correct information, to distinguish fake from true. And in those times, we've actually seen that people believed, it's actually quite valuable to pay to this news media organization. And they valued back the traditional news media organization as kind of those guardians of the truth. The only question that we have to still figure out, so we know that people value journalism, we know that people are willing to pay. The question is, what is that journalism product that would fit nowadays in people's daily lives? Because if you think about the newspaper in the past, there was such a sophisticated mechanism put in place in order to make sure that that news habit, that newspaper reading habit, fit in people's life. With your coffee in the morning at 7 o'clock, the mailman would ring at the bell, 6:30, the newspaper was on your door, and there was a whole mechanism behind it to make sure that it's done by 2 a.m., that it's picked up by a truck by 3, that it's delivered to your post office by 5, such as the postman can pick it up and bring it to you by 6. So it was not by accident, right? There were products that were built to make sure they can fit in your life, in people's life. What are the news products that can fit in our current lives? Because what we can see actually is that people's habits don't change. It's more the world around us that's changing. In the work that we're doing, we've launched a number of researches where we try to understand what do people need from news media? Why do people come to journalism? What do people look into that? And this is one of the models that were built, which is a model of the 6 cravings, where we're trying to understand what people expect, what are the needs that they're addressing with news media. So one of the things that people come to news media for is to learn something new. Journalists are, let's say, the educators of the grown-ups, so people come to learn something new. The other reason why people come to news media is to get information that is meaningful for their personal life. There is a strike on my commute to work. This information that relates to my personal life, or the inflation rate will rise. That will probably affect how I take some decisions in the future. Thirdly, there's humor, entertainment, which is so fundamental in people's lives. Been always a large part of news media, cartoons, right, puzzles, games. There's actually no wonder that the New York Times acquired Wordle, that game, for more than $1 million. Wordle. It's probably a game that some of you have also made as a high school assignment in your informatics class. Right? It's that easy to make $1 million. But it is important, it's an important part of a media organization because we know it's a need of people. The other reason why people come to news media and to journalism is to feed their FOMO, right? Breaking news. want to know what's happening so that I can be relevant when I talk to my colleagues or friends. Then there's what we call to-do items. I want to organize my life. 10 things that are happening in Brussels this weekend. Help me organize my life. And lastly, more interestingly, we see that more and more people are coming to news media organization for inspiring and positive news. People are fed up with negative news. So there you have it. 3 bits of signals that the business model is changing in a positive direction. People believe there is value in news. We see that there's increase in the willingness to pay. And we know there are models that can help us understand what people want for news. And lastly, there's technology. Now, we're a technology team, a technology company, so we're all tech professionals. And one of the research that we're looking at is, what is the toolbox that news media organizations can use in terms of technologies that can help leverage this context in which we are, leverage the models that we know, leverage and create products that people would want to pay for. So we investigated a number of technologies such as apps, emails, AI, AR, VR. I've left a QR code on the slide if you're interested to read the article. But finally, I want to leave you with one thought. I want you to think about what would be that news product that you would actually pay for. That you would actually spend 5 or 10 euros of your money on a monthly basis, right? The cost of 2 coffees at Starbucks or Mad Mom, whatever. So what is that news product? How would that look like? Would that be an app? Would it be a website? Would that have audio? Would that have video? Would that have an element of personalization? What would that be? So if you have any thoughts about that, or if you have answers to this question, I'm happy to chat more with you in the reception afterwards. Thank you very much.